This is part 2 of the read-along for Unit 3.12, Late 19th Century Painting and Sculpture. Auguste Rodin. Considered the father of modern sculpture, Auguste Rodin was a gifted artist who was fascinated by the human form. Born in Paris in 1840, Rodin spent his early years as a decorative artist. He longed to be accepted to the prestigious École des Beaux-Arts, but never gained admittance. Instead, Rodin toiled away as an apprentice to other artists and decorators for the first 20 years of his career. So this guy, Auguste Rodin, is considered the father of modern sculpture. He was fascinated by the human form, the human body. He was born in Paris in 1840, and he spent his early years as a decorative artist. So he did things like painting patterns on fancy china, like fancy dinner plates and teapots and pitchers and stuff like that. He really wanted to be accepted into the fancy art school in Paris, the École des Beaux-Arts, but he never got in. So instead, he worked as an apprentice, as sort of a student to other artists and decorators for the first 20 years of his career. A trip to Italy in 1875 had an enormous impact on Rodin's style. Inspired by the works of Donatello and Michelangelo, Rodin developed an expressive style, sometimes referred to by art historians as early expressionism, of modeling figures in unconventional poses, strengthened by his rigorous study of human anatomy. His detractors accused Rodin of creating works that looked unfinished and did not adhere to the decorative, formulaic, fashionable style at the time. Rodin persevered and did not change his approach to please the critics. Ultimately, he achieved financial success and gained the respect of the art community. In 1912, the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York opened a gallery dedicated to his work. Explore Renaissance inspiration activity on the next screen to see how Donatello and Michelangelo influenced Rodin. So, a trip to Italy in 1875 really changed the way Rodin made his art. He saw the works of Donatello and Michelangelo and got really inspired. And so he started to develop his own style, which was very expressive. And he would model his figures, his people, in unconventional or unusual, untraditional poses, strengthened by his rigorous study of human anatomy. So he was really good at the human form. He had a really good understanding of the human body and its proportions and the way it looks. And so he used that knowledge to put his figures into unconventional poses, and he made these expressive sculptures of them. His detractors, meaning people that were not fans of his work, accused him of creating works that looked unfinished and did not adhere to the decorative, formulaic style fashionable at the time. Decorative, meaning they're supposed to be pretty, right? Formulaic, meaning that there's a certain formula that the artist should follow, and that was the style that was fashionable or popular at the time. Rodin persevered and did not change his approach to please his critics, and eventually he became successful and started making money from his work, and he started to be respected for his work. And in 1912, the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York, the Met, it's a very famous museum still today, opened an entire gallery dedicated to his work. Renaissance inspiration. So you can see this is the sculpture David by Donatello, David by Michelangelo, and then the Thinker by Rodin. In what ways do you think Renaissance sculptors Donatello and Michelangelo inspired Rodin? In what ways do you think Rodin departed from Renaissance sculpting conventions? So the idea here is to kind of see what you think is similar between these three and how Rodin's version is different from Donatello and Michelangelo's versions. Remember that Rodin went to Italy and saw sculptures by Donatello and Michelangelo and got inspired by these works and then started making his own expressive sculptures. So, what do you think he saw in these sculptures that inspired him to go home and start making more expressive work that he became known for? Burgers of Calais. In 1884, Rodin won a competition offered by the mayor of the French port of Calais to create a work commemorating a heroic act in that city's history. In 1347, during the Hundred Years' War, King Edward III of England had laid siege to Calais on the north coast of France. After almost a year, the starving citizens asked for terms of surrender. King Edward agreed to spare the city if 6 prominent citizens or burghers would give themselves up for execution. 6 emaciated volunteers soon emerged through the town gate, wearing, as Edward had ordered, humble garments and nooses around their necks, and carrying the keys to the city. In the end, their lives were spared by the intervention of Edward's pregnant wife, who feared that putting them to death would prove a bad omen for her unborn child. So in 1884, the city of Calais in France put up a competition to for artists to create a work of art that commemorated this heroic act from the city's history. And that act is that in 1347, during the Hundred Years' War, King Edward III of England had laid siege to Calais. So he was attacking the city and blocking it off so that it couldn't get access to outside help and supplies. Calais is on the north coast of France, and for almost a year, King Edward III had this city under his control, and the starving citizens asked, okay, what can we do to surrender to you? What will it take for you to, end the siege? And King Edward said, okay, I won't destroy your city, and I'll let you guys go, basically, if 6 prominent citizens, 6 well-known citizens or burghers give themselves up for execution. So 6 important people from your city have to agree to let me execute them, and I'll let your city go. And so 6 emaciated or starving, very skinny volunteers soon emerged through the town gate wearing humble garments. So wearing clothes that would be more appropriate for like a peasant or a poor person than for a wealthy, prominent citizen of the city. And they had nooses around their necks, and this is how Edward had told them to come out, how he wanted them to be dressed. And they needed to be carrying keys to the city. In the end, they were not executed because Edward's wife, who was pregnant, told her husband that she didn't think that they should execute the men because putting them to death would prove a bad omen for her unborn child. A bad omen being something that means something bad is going to happen for her unborn child. So she didn't think it would be good karma, basically, to kill these 6 men while she was pregnant. She feared that it would cause something bad to happen to her unborn child. So this is the story behind the contest that Rodin won for making a work of art for this city of Calais. Rodin captured the emotional moment when the 6 men left the city, fully expecting to meet their deaths, not knowing that fate would intervene to save them. Rodin was keenly interested in creating a unified composition that conveyed the collective uncertainty, fear, and despair felt by the burghers. To capture their essence, he made multiple studies of each individual figure, first nude and then draped in burlap. Only then did he arrange them as a group. So Rodin made this sculpture of the 6 burghers that had agreed to be executed to save the city of Calais. And he tried to capture the emotions of the 6 men as they're leaving the city and they're coming out to meet their execution. And they don't know at this point uh, that they're not going to end up dead. These men are thinking that they're on their way to be put to death, and Rodin is trying to capture that emotion and express it. He wanted to create a unified composition that displayed their collective uncertainty, fear, and despair. So collective meaning as a group. They all felt this uncertainty, fear, and despair. And to capture their essence, he made multiple studies of each individual figure, first nude and then draped in burlap. Only then did he arrange them as a group. So he drew and practiced sculpting each of these men individually, first in the nude so that he could get their anatomy correct, and then draped in burlap to see how the fabric would drape on their bodies. And he did this for every single sculpture in the group before he ever decided to do all 6 of the sculptures as a group. In a departure from traditional sculpture conventions, Rodin does not create an obvious front and back in Burgers of Calais, nor does he create a dominant focal point. There was a distinguished leader among the 6 Burgers, but Rodin does not call attention to this figure. Can you guess which Burger is the leader? So, in a traditional sculpture, there would be an obvious front and an obvious back to this sculpture, and Rodin decided not to do that. He also doesn't create a dominant focal point, meaning that there's not one specific place that your eye is immediately drawn to in this sculpture. In a traditional sculpture, there would be one part of it that's very obviously the part that you're supposed to focus on, and he didn't do that. There was a leader in the group, but Rodin doesn't call attention to the leader. So can you guess which of these guys was the leader? The answer is Eustache de Saint-Pierre. The figure second from the right in this view is considered the patriarch of the Burgers of Calais. So this guy right here. He is the leader of the group.